Alright guys, we're at Six Flags over Georgia. It's Easter weekend and we're going to be looking for some Easter eggs all throughout the park. So your first Easter eggs are all over the front of the park. Here's one. There's one there. Actually, there might be several there. And then there's another one right here at the front fountain. What I'm talking about, it's the word over. Angus Wynn Jr., he wanted to make a theme park in his home state of Texas, and he was extremely proud of the history of Texas. And he found out that there had been 6 flags that had been flown in the history of Texas. So his theme park, instead of divided up into lands like Disneyland, was going to be divided up under the flags that had flown over the state of Texas. When he came up with this idea, he told his wife that he was going to name it Texas Under 6 Flags. To which his wife replied, "Texas has never been under anything." So Six Flags Over Texas was born. The second park he wanted to do was here in the state of Georgia. Just like the state of Texas, he wanted to feature the history of the state of Georgia. So the 6 flags that flew over Georgia was the British flag, the Confederate flag, the flag of Spain, the flag of France, the United States flag, and the Georgia flag. The first section of the park would have been right here after you enter the front gates, and it would have been the British section. It would have started right about here at Primo's Pizza and would have gone all the way around to the train track. The next section would have started right about here at the train trestle, and it was the Confederate state. Then from Monster Mansion, if you turn down the hill here, you see the DC Super Friends. This section here originally was the flag of Spain, the Spanish section. You would have exited the Spanish fort into the kid area, which at the time loosely themed over a community maybe in Spain. But once Warner Brothers took over and they themed it for Bugs Bunny, theming it after a Bugs Bunny short called Bully for Bugs, where you had the Matador Bugs who took a wrong turn at Albuquerque. He ended up in Mexico to fight a bull. I guess even though Bugs ended up in Mexico and not Spain, the theming still kind of fit. Then there was the French section, and the French section was basically from the exit of the Monster Mansion down to that abandoned building right there. And that was pretty much it. Past the French section, you had this kind of a anomaly section with the log cabin and Rabun Gap train station. I'm guessing you probably would have put those sections in Georgia, but it was divided up by the USA section. So the USA section went from that arch all the way over to the floral canopy. the Georgia section started here at the canopy, went around the log flume and down to the front gate. That's where you would see all the columns, the fountains, and the beautiful flowers, kind of designed to represent a southern garden. There was one other park that had the "over" in the name. It was Six Flags Over Mid-America. That was Angus's third and final park that he was able to construct. But since then, the "over" has been removed, and now it's just Six Flags St. Louis. Thankfully, the corporation has allowed the "over" to stay here and in Texas. Our next egg is the Marthasville Train Depot. The history that this represents is in 1836, the Georgia General Assembly and the Western and Atlantic Railroad wanted a link between Savannah and the Midwest. In 1839, they drove a stake to mark the terminus of the railroad, but in 1842, moved it a few blocks and called the settlement Terminus. I'm sure all you Walking Dead fans think that Terminus was original to the series, but this is where they got that name. Also in 1842, the General Assembly wanted to name the settlement Lumpkin after the then governor Wilson Lumpkin. Now, he didn't want it named after himself, he wanted it named after his daughter Martha, so it became Marthasville. But that only lasted a few years because in 1845 the chief engineer of the Georgia Railroad wanted it changed to the Atlantica Pacifica, which was quickly shortened to Atlanta. Lumpkin, the governor, was fine with that since his daughter's middle name was Antalanta. A-T-A-L-A-N-T-A. So the next two Easter eggs are the trains that run here at Six Flags. Well, actually it's just the one train now. They used to have two. They were called the Texas and the General. As you can see behind me, they're both inside the engine house. There's only one that actually travels the tracks today because a few years ago, one of them caught fire right here at this crossing. For years I just thought that the Texas was named after the state of Texas and the General was just named after maybe something here in Georgia. But I found out that in April the 12th, 1862, the Great Locomotive Chase happened. A small band of Union soldiers commandeered a northbound passenger train, which was the General. They uncoupled the passenger cars and headed north to Chattanooga. The General's conductor, who was expelled from the train, his name was William Fuller, and he started chasing the train on foot. Now, the Union soldiers had planned to burn the wooden trestles and damage the track all along the way. The problem was that it was raining and the wood wouldn't burn, and they only had a crowbar that was to damage the tracks, and that took way too long. Conductor Fuller knew that he wasn't going to catch the train on foot, so he took control of the southbound Texas train near Calhoun. He started chasing the General while running the train backwards. The chase actually ended just north of Ringgold at milepost 116.3 when the General ran out of steam. They were steam-powered engines. The Union troops scattered, and Fuller hooked up the General to the Texas and pulled it back to Adairsville. If you want to see the original General, it's on display at the Southern Museum of Civil War and Locomotive History, and the original Texas is on display at the Atlanta History Museum. Our next Easter egg is the Dahlonega mine train. Now, a lot of folks have no idea how to say it, but it's pronounced Dahlonega. And gold was discovered in that town, located in the North Georgia mountains. Thousands and thousands of people flocked to Dahlonega to strike it rich in their gold mines. Actually, there was so much gold in Dahlonega that the Congress of the United States established a mint that was built in Dahlonega to produce gold coins for currency in America. And if you take a look at the Georgia State Capitol, it's got a gold dome. And that gold dome is made up of real gold that was mined in the city of Dahlonega. Now, as a side note, in 1969, Six Flags had a kid coaster that they ran around, over, and through the Dahlonega mine train. It was called the Yahula Hooler. Now, that name came from the Yahula Creek, which is in the North Georgia mountains near Dahlonega, and it had so much gold in it that they said over 4,000 people were working just to find gold. The name of the hula hooler was a little bit hard to say, so it was eventually changed to the mini mine train, and it was completely taken out in 1988.
That's going on.
The blue building there was actually the load house for the mini mine train. Our next Easter egg actually started right here on these two poles. There used to be a sign here that said Lickskillet. And our next Easter egg is the Lickskillet area. So in 1967, as we mentioned earlier, Six Flags only had 6 areas of the park that fell under the Six Flags of Georgia. Well, in 1968, they expanded. It was their first big expansion, and it was the Lickskillet area. I was afraid a few years ago when they added the Pandemonium that they were going to change this area to kind of a screen punk, steampunk area, but lately they seem to be embracing the Lickskillet again. Now, if you look at the theming here at Lickskillet with the mill and the other things in the area, it's kind of fashioned after a gold rush town or a western themed town. They used to have a leather shop here, they had the Drunken Barrels, and early on they even had a western showdown right in the middle of the streets. Now, a lot of folks don't even know that Lickskillet was an actual place here in Georgia. It was a community that actually just lies about 3 miles east of Six Flags Over Georgia, just across the Chattahoochee River. There used to be a dirt road that ran from Atlanta, and the dirt road was called Lickskillet. It went into the community known as Lickskillet. The community is still there today, but no longer called Lickskillet. It's called Adamsville. So this one is not actually a name, but it's something that I discovered a couple weeks ago when I was here at Six Flags. Here where they're refurbing the Blue Hawk. If you look right down here, you'll see this little wooden bridge. This is left over from the ninja days. This used to be like a little Japanese pond area. I think they even have this little Japanese maple here. But yeah, you can actually see it in the lower corner of this old commercial advertising the Ninja. This one is no longer an egg anymore, but just wanted to talk about the Cotton States Exposition. Like I said, the Cotton States Exposition is no longer here. It is now called Metropolis. But it was based on an 1895 Cotton States and International Exposition that was held in Atlanta. It was at what is now Piedmont Park in the Atlanta Botanical Gardens. They had exhibits from 6 southern states and several countries from all around the world. It's probably best known for the Atlanta Compromise speech, which promoted racial cooperation, and Booker T. Washington gave that speech on opening day in 1895. So when I was younger, we called these the old-timey cars, but they were then and they are still the Hanson cars. In 1907, a man named George Washington Hanson opened up a bike shop in Griffin, Georgia. He wanted to make a low-price car for the South. He eventually developed a 6-cylinder car that was manufactured in Detroit, but primarily sold in Georgia. It was known as the Hanson 6. The slogans for the company was tested and proved in the South and made in Dixie. In 1925, he closed up shop because some say the Ford Motor Company opened up a plant in Georgia. As far as we know, there's only 2 Hanson cars left in existence. Doc Pemberton's refill station. I've seen several videos and comments over the internet talking about, I'm not sure what this means, Doc Pemberton, but John Pemberton was actually born in Knoxville, Georgia in 1865, and he went to medical school in Columbus, and he opened up a drugstore there. So without going into a lot of detail, he was injured in the Civil War, and he was in a lot of pain, so he experimented with several ingredients in the pharmacy to develop a cure. His first recipe was known as Dr. Tuckle's Compound Syrup and Globe Flour. That was not a success, so then he came up with Pemberton's French Wine Coca, developed from coca wines. But around that time, Georgia enacted temperance laws, so he had to change the formula so it didn't have any alcohol in it. And by accident, he blended the base syrup with carbonated water and decided to sell it as a fountain drink. Frank Mason Robinson came up with the name for the drink. It was called Coca-Cola. Doc Pemberton invented Coca-Cola. So this is an actual recreation of the Clem Greene schoolhouse. It was the first schoolhouse built in Fulton County in 1857. He was the first teacher, and it was originally built so that he could teach his children, his brother's children, and some of the people that lived in the area. And this was actually built in the community of Lickskillet. They used to have a Georgia historical marker here, but that's since been removed, which told you about Lickskillet, and that's where the school was built. This is the marker that has replaced the original one. So we're down here at the Rabun Gap train station. And like I said, it's kind of an anomaly. It kind of sat between the French section and the USA section. So to find out why this was called Rabun Gap, I was thinking, okay, the other train station's Marthasville. The trains have a lot to do with the Great Locomotive Chase. So why couldn't they have named this station something like Adairsville or Tunnel Hill? That was where the Great Locomotive Chase went through. Even Calhoun. But Rabun Gap, that's on the other side of the state. So I got to doing some research, and this is what I found out. So I got looking up connections to the Great Locomotive Chase, and it could be thanks to Mr. Walt Disney himself that this is named Rabun Gap. Because in 1956, Walt Disney made a film about the Great Locomotive Chase starring Fess Parker, who also played Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett. The filming location for the Great Locomotive Chase was on the Tallulah Falls Railroad, which actually ran through Rabun Gap. Because the Great Locomotive Chase was filmed on the Tallulah Falls Railroad and runs through Rabun Gap, Georgia, I think that's why this is called Rabun Gap, as a tribute to the Great Locomotive Chase movie from Walt Disney. So since the time I filmed most of this video back in 2025, which was before I had the throat cancer, Six Flags has added some other Easter eggs, and most of those have been in the Monster Mansion. But I got to thinking, why not make more Easter eggs at Six Flags? Maybe change the Daredevil Dive Coaster to the Hazel Raines Daredevil Dive Coaster. Hazel was the first female to get a pilot's license in the state of Georgia in 1938. And then later on in World War II, she became an instructor in the civilian pilots training program. Maybe another ride that they could rebrand is the Pandemonium. Maybe change it to the Okefenokee Sweeper, or even Pandemonium and the Okefenokee. You know, that'd be paying homage to the old tales of the Okefenokee, plus, of course, the Okefenokee is in South Georgia. Then another ride that could be rebranded is Thunder River. You know, you could call it something like the Chattahoochee Thunder River or the Nantahala Thunder River. You know, it'd be probably a little bit harder to do, but it could be done, Six Flags. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you've learned a little bit about the Easter eggs at Six Flags that reflect on the history of Georgia. So until next time, the road is closed.
No, you dang fools! This way! Stay out of the marsh! Stay out of the marsh! Oh no!